Alright guys, how's it going? I am finally doing my review of the Thrustmaster T.Flight HOTAS X. Right, now I'm going to be looking at this from the point of view of a mouse user, but to start off with, let's just have a look at the actual HOTAS. Now HOTAS stands for hands-on throttle and stick, yeah, which means you've got a throttle and a stick. The unit comes out the box joined together, however, if you look underneath it, you can see that there is a wire that you can unwind from the base of the throttle. If you stretch it out fully, you get a gap of about 50 centimeters, say. So you may actually be able to fit your keyboard in between, and I know a lot of people actually do that. Now you've also got an Allen key underneath the stick, and that's what you use to separate the unit in the first place. Also underneath the stick is your joystick resistance knob or dial, so you can turn that around until you find the resistance that you require. That's very much going to be a personal thing though, so you're just going to have to fiddle around with that until you find something that, really suits you. Now what about the stick itself? The entire unit's made out of plastic, yeah? Which you'd probably expect for something at this price range. If you've got very small hands, you may find that it's probably a little bit too big. I personally find it pretty comfortable. It's got a handrest at the side of it where you can sit your hand and, it feels sturdy enough and pretty comfortable for me just having my hand on the thing. Even though the stick itself is plastic, the actual mechanical movement feels pretty good. Down at the bottom where you've got the rubber part and the inside of the stick, it feels strong and sturdy, so, that's definitely a plus factor. Now onto the throttle. It's just like what you would expect it to be, yeah? You push it forward to move forward, back to move back. It doesn't have an awful lot of resistance in it, and some people do say that, it feels like, there's no bite there, there's no resistance, and they dislike that. However, I've also read about people with other throttles who say that they actually prefer the lack of resistance on the HOTAS X. For me, I find it absolutely fine. Maybe if it just had a tiny bit more resistance, it would give it that feel of being, less cheap. However, for me though, absolutely fine. You've also got the rocker switch on the back. Again, it's made out of plastic. It feels fine though. Possibly we could have done with a little bit of resistance in it again. However, I'm not going to complain too much about that. Now, the entire unit comes with 12 buttons, but don't worry too much about that if you're thinking, no, that's never enough, because there are ways to increase that number quite dramatically. On the stick itself, your main fire button, button 1, it's got a very plasticky feel to it. I'm not super keen on that at all. You've also got button 3 at the side, which is pretty similar. It's not a fantastic button, but it's better to have one there than not have it at all. Your 2 thumb buttons, again, quite plasticky, so not fantastic either. However, they do the job. You've also got your hat switch, which again does have that plastic feel to it. I don't want to keep saying this, but yeah, there's no question about it. It is, the entire unit is made out of plastic and it's clear. The hat switch itself is a very nice thing to have for flight sims and other space games. Now, the buttons on throttle are actually much better. They've got a nice click to them, nice feel to them, especially the ones on the actual throttle itself. You've got a couple of buttons on the base of the throttle too, which are fine. They're not critical buttons, so you would use those for something, for non-critical abilities. So I used the word plastic an awful lot there. That's just, the feel of the unit is very much a plastic feel to it. But again, what do you really expect for the price? I personally feel it is absolutely fine. It doesn't bother me in the slightest, in all honesty. It's just that more expensive joysticks will have a more expensive feel to them, so keep that in mind. Now at the beginning I said I was going to look at this from the perspective of a mouse user. When I first started using the HOTAS X, I found it incredibly difficult to use. It was really unwieldy. I couldn't do simple stuff like even take off and land, but that was simply because I had never actually used a joystick for about the past 20 years. However, it took me a very long time to get to the stage where I even felt like it was, comfortable to use. So some people will tell you that, get yourself a HOTAS and you'll immediately become an awesome player. This is simply not true. You won't be, especially if you weren't very awesome to start with, yeah? However, the saying that practice makes perfect is sort of true. In this case, I'm not convinced that perfect is actually going to be the case. I've been using a mouse for a very, very long time, and I just feel that I will never really reach that level of precision with the HOTAS X. This is especially true when you use the stick at its normal out of the box state. the stick lacks precision close in, and Thrustmaster's official software doesn't actually work with the HOTAS X. There is a solution to this, and it is called joystick curves. Now, I made a video on joystick curves. There's the link, you can check that one out. I strongly recommend that anybody purchasing the HOTAS X uses joystick curves to increase the precision of the stick close in. It's a fantastic little program. It works great, and it really makes the stick an awful lot more accurate. I would say I have put about 50 hours play into the HOTAS X now, just mostly playing Elite Dangerous. And it is true in a way, you know, practice does make sort of perfect. I'm about 90% of what my mouse play is, and I may never get better than that. This is really all about how good are you with a mouse. If you're kind of expert level with a mouse, you'll probably know that that is the case. It's not going to make you more accurate, yeah? There's no way that any joystick is going to make an expert mouse player more accurate. It's just not possible as far as I'm concerned. However, there are other benefits to the HOTAS X. It gives it quite a big advantage over mouse and keyboard play. So I'm going to discuss that now. In most flight sims, space sims, stuff like that, you're going to be using a lot of different controls for similar types of movement. Take, for example, yaw, roll, and thrusters. Yeah, that's like 3 different ways to move left and right, for want of better terminology. Now, you try to do that with a keyboard and mouse, and you're going to need to have some pretty, deft finger work. I personally find it almost impossible, and so when I'm playing, I generally don't actually use my left and right thrusters very much, which is quite a big disadvantage. With the HOTAS, all this feels much more natural. You've got the twist on the stick for your yaw. Left and right is obviously just rolling left and right, so you can do those both at the same time quite easily. And you can also button map thrusters left, right, forward, backwards, up and down onto the throttle. This is really gives a big help over using the keyboard for that type of thing. Now, there is another thing I want to mention about this. A lot of keyboards have issues with ghosting, so the more keys you press, the more likely one of them won't actually work. I actually run into this issue many videos ago when I made a video on Elite Dangerous again. I was flying around in my ship and I was trying to do lots of things like yaw left and thrust left or thrust up while changing my power distribution, and I finally realised this wasn't working right because I was having a ghosting issue with my keyboard. In other words, I was pressing so many keys on the keyboard that I had found a fault in the keyboard. One of the keys simply didn't work. Now, more expensive keyboards are not going to have that ghosting issue. On the flip side, you could be paying well over $100 to $150 for a keyboard that doesn't have an issue like that. But really, the story here is, if you're really good with the mouse already, you're not going to find that level of precision with the HOTAS X or any joystick. However, there are other advantages of using the stick that, maybe you're not quite aware of. Just the fact that you can use that 6 degrees of freedom movement is so much more intuitive and so much easier with the HOTAS X. Now, I also mentioned earlier the lack of buttons, or the 12 buttons on the HOTAS. Most games will allow you to make shift buttons in the options. So for example, if I hold down my 8 button, which is the one I use for my shift button, the rest of my buttons can be used for any other ability. So in effect, you have far more than 12 usable buttons. I should also mention that there is a remapping ability on the joystick itself. I don't bother using it, but if you need to use it, maybe for older games or something like that, then that option is there on the stick itself. So really, why would I want to use a HOTAS X? If I'm as good as I think I am with a mouse, why would I use a HOTAS X? Well, I am using the HOTAS X, and the reason for it is simply one of immersion. What makes the HOTAS X so good is the increased level of immersion. The best way for me to really describe this is to show you what I play the game like sometimes using Eyefinity. Now, Eyefinity is a setup with 3 monitors, 2 at either side of my main monitor, yeah? And as you can see, you get a much wider view, and it gives you a huge increase in the level of immersion. Rather than staring at a single screen right in front of you, you feel sort of like enclosed, especially in driving games and space games. You've got a massively increased level of immersion as you feel sort of actually in the cockpit. The Thrustmaster T.Flight HOTAS X is a lot like Eyefinity for your hands. You've got that increased level of immersion way beyond anything that you will ever get while playing with a mouse. It's almost like playing a completely different game. Now, many of you will have used joysticks in the past, but fewer of you have probably used a throttle along with the stick. The joystick itself adds another level of immersion, you probably know that, but when you're using the stick and the throttle, it is yet another level of immersion. It's a really difficult thing to quantify until you actually try it for yourself though. When I first started trying to learn to use the HOTAS X, I was really struggling, like I said, and I just quit. I gave up on it because it was so much more difficult to fly properly. But after going back to the mouse, I began to realise that I was enjoying my gaming less. That's the sort of difference that the HOTAS X makes in terms of just pure gaming enjoyment. And if you think about it, why are you doing it? Why are you gaming? It's for fun, it's for enjoyment. I realise that winning is important as well, obviously, for a lot of people. However, unless you are really hell-bent on winning, you are going to get so much more enjoyment out of using the T.Flight HOTAS X compared to a mouse. And for me, I just don't want to go back to the mouse. I do not enjoy my gaming anything like as much. Now, talking about Eyefinity leads me on to the next point. Virtual reality is coming very soon, and yes, it is going to be massive. I know a lot of people don't believe it, but it's going to be coming soon, and it's going to be massive. You think about it, right? Within maybe a year or two, you're going to be sitting with a headset on, and your immersion level is going to be through the roof. Trust me on that one. However, you're not going to be able to really use a mouse and keyboard at that time. Almost all the guys that I know that are using virtual reality right now, the Oculus Rift, are using joysticks because it's obviously a much easier way to play the game. And again, like I said, you're getting even more immersion. This is something you might want to think about for the future because, the mouse could be on the way out anyway. But to sum that one up, that is the real reason why I am using the HOTAS X. The immersion factor is over 9,000. You're playing a different game. It's the difference between playing a game and experiencing something. That's about the best way that I can really explain it. Right, so bringing this review of the T.Flight HOTAS X to an end, I'm just going to go through the pros and cons. The main pro is, of course, the fantastic level of immersion that the stick and throttle gives you. It's out of this world, there is nothing to compare to it. You get intuitive 6 degrees of freedom flying, way more than you will ever get with a keyboard and mouse. You also circumvent any potential issues with ghosting if you're using a bog standard keyboard. Finally, the unit itself is incredibly well priced. It is an entry level HOTAS, but it's got an entry level price. Looking at the cons, I don't think there's any way of getting around it. If you're really good with the mouse, if you're an expert mouse user, you're going to lose some accuracy with this. The build quality on the stick, especially the fire buttons, is a little bit questionable, so that's something you maybe want to look out for. One thing I didn't actually mention, if you've been using the mouse and keyboard for a while, you're going to find this tiring to use. The stick is pretty tiring on the hands and wrist, and even though I've put in a lot of hours, I still find it very tiring to use compared to the mouse. Finally though, I've got to give the T.Flight HOTAS X my wholehearted recommendation. It is a fantastic product at a great price. I just keep talking about the immersion. It's absolutely out of this world. You're playing a different game when you're using the T.Flight HOTAS X. Just be aware of the drawbacks that I talked about. Keep your expectations reasonable and in check, and I am absolutely sure that you will love this piece of hardware. I'd like to thank Thrustmaster for sending me the review sample of the T.Flight HOTAS X. I also found them to be a very approachable company, which is a major plus in my book. You can click on this box or links in the description to get to the latest prices for the T.Flight HOTAS X. Thank you very much for watching this review. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you later.